Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Casey looked at herself in the mirror and thought about how awful she looked in her 18 years. She was full, and that fullness didn't make her look good at all. Her whole face was dotted with small pimples, and when she tried to do something about them, she saw that after different procedures, they became even more on her face. "Mom, but why are you so beautiful? I'm so ugly. Who gave me such a face and figure?" "Daughter, you won't believe me. I was the same, and then when I was 19 years old and married to your father, it all went away. I still remember the moment he proposed to me. I thought I was dreaming. Yes, and he used to joke and say that I was like a fairy tale frog princess turned into a beautiful princess. Although he fell in love with me ugly because he liked talking to me at first, and then he realized he was in love. And no one will fall in love with me. Why not? I think you should start talking to Joe. He arrived yesterday from England, where his parents sent him to study. Well, his family wants to be related to us, so we want you to marry him. You remember Joe, don't you? You used to play together when you were kids. I remember him very well. He used to pick on me all the time because he was older. I can't stand him. By the way, Mom, I feel like we're living in feudal times." "Why do you say that?" "Because I don't want to marry that Joe. I don't want to." "I know, but you remember that your father and Joe's father have been friends since they were kids, and now they've decided to be related, and he's got a business problem, and your father's helping them out. So, daughter, I think it's a perfect match, and you better accept it. Besides, there's no point in arguing with your father. In fact, it's useless." "Mom, but it's not right. I thought I had the right to choose my own husband like you did." "You're wrong. I didn't have a choice either. My daddy, your grandfather, helped Tony's father a lot. Then they became friends and decided to marry us. Me and Tony didn't want that. I told you before, we couldn't stand each other. Besides, I was very ugly. They made us meet, and to please them, we went out with them every night, and then we fell in love. Mom, but Dad is a beautiful, kind, and wonderful man. And that Joe is a complete fool, and I can't stand him. That's just your childhood memories. He's a very handsome man now. By the way, I saw him yesterday, so I think you'll like him. They invited us to their house on Sunday. It's Joe's mom's birthday, so you'll have to be ready. They live in the country, so we're going to have a sleepover on Saturday. That'll give you time to get to know him." I didn't expect this from my dad, but I'm going to talk to him and see if I can change his mind. "Talk to him, of course. But I'll tell you right away, you won't succeed. If your dad's made up his mind, it'll be hard to change his mind." "Mom, he loves me. So why does he want me to suffer? He can't." "Casey, I told you everything, so be reasonable and don't argue now, especially with your father." Mom left her daughter's room and went to the kitchen to instruct the cook what to make for dinner. Casey was left alone, sat down on the bed and thought about it. Mom says he's very handsome, which is good, but when he looks at me, he'll change his mind. But that's good for me, although, to be honest, he wasn't very thin then either, a pale teenager with a terrible temper. I couldn't stand him because he was always running to his mother and complaining about me, saying I was hurting him. Of course, I was already fat then, and I had more strength than him, even though he was 5 years older than me. When he hurt me, I hit him back, and he'd start crying. Yeah, it was a long time ago, but I'd like to see what he looks like now. Casey decided to take things slow and not talk to her father yet, because she knew that most likely when Joe saw her, he too would start arguing with her parents and telling them that he would never marry that fat toad, of course. A bit of a shame, but I guess in this case I'll need to be glad of it. Joe went into his father's study to talk. He was in a hurry because he was going to go to the club with his friends to celebrate his arrival. They had already called him and told him they were waiting for him. "Dad, you wanted to talk to me about something. Sit down, son, and listen to me very carefully. There's a crisis in my company, and I almost went bankrupt. Thanks to Tony, he bailed me out, and I owe him a debt of gratitude. By the way, he's got a daughter named Casey growing up. She's a very nice girl. You were friends with her when you were a kid, don't you remember?" "I remember that fat cow. She pissed me off a lot back then." "Well, we want you to get married." "What, Dad? What are you talking about? I don't want to marry her." "Why would I want to marry her?" "I understand he said your business, but why would he ruin my life?" "Son, you don't understand. If you become his son-in-law, all doors will be open to you. It'll take us a long time to get up off our knees, so to speak. And you're young, you need support, and Tony will give it to you. No, Dad, I'd rather make my own way in this life. Because I'm not marrying that chicken. Don't even remind me of that again, and it's not up for discussion. I told you you'd marry her. Then you're marrying her, and I don't care what you decide or what you're gonna do about it. Joe slammed the door, walked out of the house, got in the car, and drove to the club. It pissed him off that his father had made up his mind like that and hadn't even consulted him. Besides, he wasn't going to get married, he wanted to go out more. In addition, the age was fine. You could go out and go out. And here it is that now what to do he did not know. And now he was angry with himself, his father, and Tony's family. Especially that fat crow he couldn't stand. Joe, what are you so angry about? Something wrong? Something's wrong. My father told me he's gonna marry me. Now I don't know what I'm gonna do. Who to? Tony's daughter. I think her name's Casey. The boys laughed. Yeah, Joe, tough luck. She's the ugliest girl I ever seen in my life. She's fat and covered in pimples. I can't even touch her. So you're probably gonna have to drink a lot on your wedding night. Even that won't help you. I see, so Tony wants to dump his ugly daughter on me, so she won't be an old maid. I'm getting that right. Yeah, she's a long way from being an old maid. She's only 18 years old. She's in her first year of college. With that kind of money, she could have done nothing, but she got in on her own. She's in a very prestigious department. She's ugly, but she's very smart. Annabelle told me that her father wants her to work for him when she graduates. He wants to pass everything on to her because she's their only daughter. Annabelle's mom is friends with Casey's mom, hence the news. That fat cow doesn't talk to anybody. She's got a couple friends, but they're worse than her, look the same, fat and ugly. In general, she gathered a herd around her apparently, to raise her self-esteem. And they're asking me to marry this scarecrow. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do something about that, because I don't want to ruin my life. Joe didn't get back till the morning. He was drunk. Plus, he met a great girl who invited him to her house, and they had a great time until morning. He knew he was a good-looking guy and that girls really liked him. The only thing that dampened his great mood was the thought that he was going to get married. But he was determined that he would do anything to ensure that it was Casey herself who would refuse the marriage. Though that would apparently be difficult to do, because someone like her would probably want to marry him. On Saturday morning, Casey was going to visit Joe. She was nervous because she realized he probably wouldn't like her. He probably liked girls who looked like models, but it couldn't be helped, because she could see that her father was very determined. The day before, she had talked to her friends who, after listening to her, said they wouldn't want to be in her shoes. But how can you be married to a man you can't stand? It's not right. I know, but there's no use arguing with my father. If he says so, it must be so. There's nothing more you can do. Maybe you should talk to your mom. She's very nice. I've talked to her, but it's no use. She's afraid of my father too, and she won't cross him. Then you're screwed, girl. You're gonna have to marry that Joe after all. Well, you tell us on Monday what he looks like. We'd like to know. Me too. I remember him. He was ugly when he was a kid, and we couldn't stand each other, to tell you the truth. Now I realize he's gotten better looking, but of course he won't want to marry me. It's a shame, of course, but what to do? I guess I have such a fate. My mom says she was the same, and then everything went away, and the weight went away, and acne. The interesting thing is, no matter how many diets I go on, nothing works. My mom had the same thing, so she calms me down. She says that when I get married, I'll be very beautiful. I know my mom told me about my neighbor. She said she suffered too, couldn't look at herself in the mirror. And then when she slept with a man, she got over it all at once. Apparently you're like that too, so don't worry, you'll get married and everything will be fine. We'd envy you, Casey. You'll be a married girl soon. Lucy was looking forward to the guests. She realized that, of course, the most important guests were Tony's family. They were due to arrive soon for the party. Everything was ready, and the guests were not due to gather until the evening. But Tony's family were due to arrive early. Plus, they were staying overnight since they lived in town. She knew they had a house outside of town too, but they didn't live there because the head of the family didn't want to live far from his job. It was too far for his daughter to get to the institute. And Nani, of course, was close to them because she couldn't leave them, even though she didn't care. She didn't work anywhere. Lucy had been worried about her husband lately. Barry didn't say anything to her. She understood though. She told him not to get involved in the scam because everything was at stake and he lost. Well, Tony helped him out and the business, though a bit shabby, returned to her husband. Of course, there was still plenty of work to do, really. There was no money, and it all depended on Tony's family. And if he managed to marry the children, then one could breathe easy. After all, they have an empire. He's like a spider, weaving his webs into so many cities. His banks were everywhere. Joe needs to explain again that if he doesn't marry Casey, then he'll have to go to work. Although the son back from England expected to work with his father, but no such luck. Tony had returned the business to Barry, but now he was kind of in on it and said he would look after everything himself and get them back on their feet, provided they were related. They agreed because they realized it was the only way they could escape poverty. Lucy was deathly afraid that she would have to go back to work, that they would have no car, no servants, and of course, no money. For her, it became a nightmare. She would wake up in a cold sweat, look at her sleeping husband and think that she would do anything to get her son to listen to him and do as they said. Saturday was sunny and warm. Autumn, of course, was coming into its own, but before the bad weather decided to treat people to some warmth. Lucy decided to celebrate her birthday outside. The gazebos were already ready, where the tables were standing, where there would be snacks and drinks. There would be a buffet during the day, and in the evening they would go home and have dinner. It was a lot of money, but my husband insisted to make sure everything was upscale, so as not to embarrass Tony. Everything has to be nice and rich. He knows my plight, of course, but we've got to keep up appearances. Besides, their daughter's coming tonight. Would you please warn Joe to be impolite? We need this wedding. If he refuses, you'll have to find a job starting Monday. I won't have him in my firm. Tell him that. Barry, I understand, but I don't think it's right. Why marry the kids? What's that got to do with them? Besides, have you seen Casey? Who does she look like? Her mom's very pretty, and Tony's an attractive man too, but their daughter's something awful. Our Joe won't go through with this way. He has to. Talk to him as soon as we're back on our feet, then he can do whatever he wants. Do you understand me? Tell him he can always get a divorce, but we've got to get our affairs in order or we'll be penniless. And I take it you don't want to be poor. You're used to having everything. Servants in the house, cars, jewelry, brand name clothes. Only you don't forget that all this may end up helping me, otherwise everything will come to an end. I hear you, Barry. I'm gonna go talk to my son again. Casey twirled around in front of the mirror and realized that no pretty dress was going to make her attractive. Her mom had told her to wear a blue evening dress that looked like a cow saddle on her. She watched herself and sighed. At that moment, her mom walked into the room and looked at her daughter and smiled. It's your size, but I can see you're not happy about something. Mom, what's there to be happy about? I'm very ugly. Nothing suits me. It's going to be okay, daughter. You'll be 19 soon, and believe me, everything will change for you. You're gonna be the most beautiful girl of the world. You're gonna have men chasing after you. It's hard to believe, but I'll go like this, although I'd love to wear a tracksuit to hide my creases. You can't. We're going to a banquet, not a picnic. But if you're ready, take your bag and go out. The chauffeur's waiting. My father will be here later. He's at work. Said he had some business to take care of. Tony sat in his office and looked at his watch. He didn't really have anything to do. He was just waiting for someone to bring him some information. It was about Barry and his family. He'd been friends with him since childhood, but his friend had changed a lot lately. And now he had to be sure because he was going to give them his only daughter. Though he realized that most likely the young ones, if they did get married, would not live together because his daughter Casey was ugly. Though he knew it would pass. Like her mom, he thought with a smile. It was me who saw her inner beauty first, and then it was revealed. And I realized I had hit the jackpot. Not only was she smart, but she was beautiful too. But I don't think that Douchy Joe will see anything in her, because he's got the wind in his head. He, of course, in himself was not in love with this union, but he realized that this way he and Sega friend and his firm will be under his control. And the firm, by the way, was very worthwhile. If Barry was a smart manager, he would be swimming in money. But that's all right, he'll do it himself and take half the income for himself. Nothing personal, as they say, but business is business. Soon a man came in and silently handed him an envelope. Tony looked through the documents and smirked. Barry still manages to keep a mistress. Good for him. I can't say it enough. Tony himself had never understood it, because he thought that if you wanted to see other women, then you shouldn't get married. And if you got married, then don't go out. But Barry must have thought otherwise, because with this woman who was in the picture, he had been dating for 5 years. But the most interesting thing was not even that, but the fact that she had dragged him into this adventure. And he had lost everything as he didn't realize it himself. Or did he? Then why were they still together? Is he still dating this Lily? Because he doesn't know who's behind it. His mistress owes some brothers a lot of money, so she set her lover up and paid off the gangsters. Barry didn't realize it. He thought it was his competitors setting him up. I don't understand why he behaves like that with her. It's obvious that she's a woman of easy behavior, and as they used to say, there's no place to brand her, and he's with her all the time. Isn't his wife enough for him? It's just that our Barry has a little secret that only Lily doesn't know. I've laid it all out there, by the way. Just keep reading. After Tony finished, he laughed out loud. Yeah, Barry, I didn't expect you to be like that. Everyone has their own cockroaches, though, and that goes for business, and business doesn't apply. Thanks, Rocky. You're on top of your game, as always. By the way, I want a full dossier on his mistress as well. I want to know who she is and where she came from, because I don't want her in my way. You know how it is. We might overlook her. She'll surprise us again. I don't want that. Tony will do it. You'll have the report on your desk in 2 days. Tony opened the safe and took out a puffy package, handed it to Rocky, and thanked him. There's also a bonus. Everything was done well and quickly. You did a good job. Rocky silently took the envelope, slipped it into his pocket, and silently walked out. He was always a man of few words, and Tony was fine with that. Well, Barry, as it turns out, there's a lot I don't know about you. Well, we'll live and see. It's up to you now, how you behave with me, and then we'll see. Barry was in his office talking to his mistress. Well, I'm sorry, honey. I can't be here today or tomorrow. You know my wife's birthday. Don't say that. You told me you didn't care that I was married. Now you're yelling at me. Besides, I've got an important guest tonight. Tony's a banker. You know how important that is to me. We used to be very good friends, but then we lost each other. And for the last few years, we've been reconnecting. And after what happened to me, he was the only one who came to my rescue. Of course, it's all for a reason. And now he's gonna be in control of my business. Well, I think we can work something out. Besides, he has a daughter and I have a son. We're gonna marry them off and be related. It's a lifesaver for me. I think you know what I'm talking about. He listened to what his favorite woman was saying and smiled. You've always understood me perfectly. You know, I've been thinking that as soon as I get things going, I'll divorce my wife. I'm fed up with her, always meddling in everything, wanting to know and control everything. Although she herself has not even worked a day, makes herself a socialite, but in fact dumb as a cork. You're the woman who's smart and beautiful. She's no match for you. Lucy went into her son's room, who was sitting at his desk watching something on the computer. Son, do you remember what's coming today? Casey, please don't hurt her. You realize how important this is to us right now. I don't, Mom. And let's drop the subject. You want me to marry a crocodile? I look at her pictures on social media, and I don't understand how anyone could love such a monster. She's just ugly. Who was she born to be like that? I mean, her mom and her dad are beautiful, but she's just. I understand, son, but you have to be patient with us. Besides, we're not saying you have to live with her for the rest of your life. As soon as things get better, you can divorce her, and that's it. Joe looked at his mother, nodded. After she left, he realized that it's not him who's in a tough spot, it's Casey herself. They just all want to take advantage of her and everyone will be fine except her, but he didn't feel sorry for her. A normal guy wouldn't even look at someone like her, let alone marry her. So let her be happy to be the wife of a handsome man like him for a little while. And as soon as her father will be fine, he will immediately divorce her and find a normal girl, which will be nice to look at. Slowly the guests gathered, and Lucy walked among them saying hello. She said a few words to them and went on her way. Half the people she didn't know. They were her husband's partners who looked at her curiously. She didn't like those looks. It seemed to her that they were laughing at her because they knew perfectly well the plight she was in. But she raised her head because she was used to keeping a straight face, as they say. They all think she doesn't know or understand anything. They don't care what's going on in her soul. She knew perfectly well that her husband has a mistress, and he prefers her to his wife. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she tried, She couldn't get her husband's love back. She even stooped to the point of following him because she wanted to see who he had traded her for. She was disappointed this girl was just vulgar, but he looked at her with loving eyes. She couldn't stand it then. She came home and got drunk with her for the first time. Now every night when her husband was late at work, as he told her, she would go to the bottle, so it was easier for her to fall asleep. And all sorts of thoughts did not enter her head. Soon 2 cars pulled up to the gate. They were tinted Jeeps. Lucy wondered, don't they get fined for that? And then when she saw that it was Tony's family, she realized everything at once. People like that don't get ticketed. They get the green light everywhere. She put on her prettiest smile and went to meet them. Hello. Finally, it's so good to see you. To see you, Nanny. You look beautiful. Casey, you're all grown up now. Tony, we've been waiting for you for a long time. She paid attention to everyone, and out of the corner of her eye, she noticed how excited her guests were. You bet, such a man had arrived. After all, everyone wanted to be friends with him, but he came to congratulate her. Come in, please. I'll get Barry for you. He's in his office having an important conversation. Tony smiled after these words because he understood perfectly well who Barry was talking to. He put his arm around his wife's waist and kissed her neck softly. You look beautiful, darling. You're wearing what looks like a very modest dress, but it looks beautiful. You'll outshine all the guests tonight. By the way, why do you always wear so little jewelry? Well, I'm not a Christmas tree to put everything on at once. The only thing that goes with this dress are the diamond earrings. Anything else would be unnecessary. You have great taste, sweetheart, and I have a surprise for you. But I can't give it to you until Monday when it'll be ready. Did you order something for me? What did you forget? It's our anniversary on Monday. You're an amazing husband because I really forgot. And you're an amazing woman. I think you're the only person in the world who doesn't remember dates like that at all. Although if I were you, I'd have a man's mind blown. Nanny laughed softly and hugged Tony. She looked at him with loving eyes, realizing that she had made the right choice then, because she had fallen in love with this man as soon as she saw him. Lucy walked to the study and saw that as soon as her husband saw her, he immediately turned off his phone. The pain stabbed at her heart because she realized who he was talking to now. What do you want? Barry asked her a little gruffly. Tony's family are here, so you need to get out. Although I think you're the one who should have met him, not me. But it's okay to tell Tony I had an important conversation. He'll understand. By the way, what do you think of his wife? She's a very beautiful woman, and she has excellent taste. You should look up to her. She runs a brand-name clothing store, by the way. She's a designer herself, and Tony supports her every step of the way. And for good reason. She makes a good living and can even support herself. And you're sitting on my ass and doing nothing. How can you do that? Open a store for me. Open a store for me, and I'll support myself too. Barry couldn't find anything to say to her, so he stood up and walked out. Lucy stayed a little longer, went to the bar, poured herself some whiskey, and drank it in one gulp. Then she looked at herself in the mirror, smiled, and walked out. Barry walked over to Tony, said hello to his wife and daughter, and extended his hand in greeting. Well, finally, I've been waiting for you. And then I got a call and had to go up to my office. What took you so long? It's work, too. I think you understand me. Tony smiled slyly. Barry smiled too and looked at Nani, who was standing with a glass of wine, listening to their conversation. Tony realized what Barry was thinking and he felt bad. He had never cheated on Nani. He'd never had such a thought. He loved her so much that it never occurred to him to look at another woman. Yes, when he was young he had a good time, and now he didn't need it anymore because he was getting everything he needed from his wife. He put his arms around Nani again and pulled her to him. Barry noticed this and turned away. Lucy saw that Joe hadn't come down yet, so she decided to go to his room to call out to him. What are you poking around for? Do you want your father to be angry with you? The guests are here. Tony's family is here. So please go downstairs. Don't make anyone nervous. I'm coming, Ma. You can see I just got out of the shower. I want to impress my bride-to-be. I don't know how long I'm gonna be able to do it, because with a crocodile like her, I won't last long. Come on, son. She's a very polite and nice girl, by the way. Be nice to her. You understand me? I do, Mom. You've been explaining this to me for a week. I'm not stupid. I know I have to help my father, and I'll do anything to make things better for him. even if I have to marry that ugly girl. But then I thought about it and decided it's not a judgment call. As soon as things get better, I'll divorce her right away. That's fine. Don't think about anything else. The only thing that matters is our family, and I don't care about anyone else. In the past, I might have told you that you can't do that, but now I think that in our cruel world, we should do what they do to us. Joe looked at his mother in surprise because it was the first time he had ever seen her like that. She had never expressed herself like that. She had always been kind and sweet. Now there was a completely different woman standing in front of him. All right, Mom, you go ahead. I need to change. By the way, here's my present for you and happy birthday again. What did your father get you? Nothing yet, but I think he'll give it either before the guests or tonight, said Lucy and left the room. She knew very well that most likely there would be no present from her husband. It had been a long time since he had given her anything, and she understood why she was hurting again, and before leaving the guests went to the bar again. Casey stood apart from the guests and looked at them thoughtfully. People were talking amongst themselves about something. She didn't like events like this. She felt out of place at them. She would have loved to stay at home like she always did, if it weren't for the fact that her parents had decided to marry her off. She searched her eyes for Joe, but didn't see him anywhere. Soon he appeared, and she even squeezed her eyes shut. She had seen pictures of him, but he was even more handsome in person. He was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Apparently, he didn't care that his mom was having a celebration, so he decided to go out in whatever he felt comfortable in. Hey, Casey, remember me? Joe asked, scrutinizing the flushed girl. Hi, of course I remember you. And you haven't changed at all, I see. It's strange, you've just gotten taller, and all your pimples and fat are still there. Joe didn't know what had gotten into him. He remembered that he had promised himself that he would behave tactfully because he knew he had to help his father. The words came out on their own. If Cassie had noticed how much better looking Joe had become, he, in turn, had noticed how ugly she had become. Before, as a child, her face had been more pretty. Now even that was gone, he realized that he probably couldn't marry someone like her. It was beyond him. Yes, I see you've stayed the same, a shallow and cowardly teenager. It's a shame. I thought you'd be smarter now, but you probably can't be. She turned and walked away. Joe looked at her and thought that she was a smart girl, but that wasn't enough. And then how his friends would laugh at him. He couldn't drink enough to get into bed with her. Casey walked angrily among the guests. Though she was aware of her own attitude, she didn't expect any different, but Joe might not have told her all this. She knew it all because she looked at herself in the mirror every day. I'll tell my father that I'm not going to marry him. Let him do what he wants, but I will not tolerate such an attitude to myself. She realized, of course, that she was very angry with Joe, though remembering his face, her heart clenched treacherously and told her that she was in love, and very much in love. She had never believed in love at first sight. It had always seemed to her that there was no such thing and that it was just invented by writers to make people interested in reading their books. But now she was convinced that there really was such a feeling. It struck her brain and heart lightning fast and made her think only about this person, and no one else. Mommy, I don't want to stay here. I want to go home, said Casey as she approached her mother, who was standing with a woman and talking to her about something. Daughter, wait for me a little while. I'll finish the conversation now and we'll talk. Casey came to her senses, smiled at the woman who was standing next to her mom and said, Please forgive me. I just felt a little bad, so I jumped into your conversation. Again, I apologize. It's okay, Mom, I'll just drink some water and I'll feel better. Mom smiled, realizing that Casey had come to her senses and would now calm down a bit. They would finish talking too, and she would talk to her, though she already understood what had happened. Most likely Joe had heard her daughter. She had seen them talking. True, their conversation had come out very short. A little later she took her daughter under her arm, and they walked slowly into the garden, where there was no one. Forgive me, Mother, I behaved very rude. I intruded into your conversation. I should have waited for you, but I couldn't. I understand, and I'm not angry. Besides, you fixed it quickly, and no one noticed. Now tell me what happened with Joe. He said I was just as fat and ugly as I was before, and I called him an idiot. That was our whole dialogue. I see. Now tell me how you like him. Casey looked carefully at her mom and then blushed. Mom, of course I liked him. I mean, he's so handsome. But I realized that it won't work out because he'll never love someone like me. You shouldn't believe in your own strength, but that's because you're still very young. To be honest, when I was your age, I didn't believe I could be beautiful. Now look at me. Ma, you're beautiful. Only I'll probably never be. You know what I've done? I've been on every diet I've ever been on, and it just keeps getting worse. I know I told you right away not to mess with your body, but you didn't listen to me. Now look, I know you're hurt by Joe's words, but you have to take it. Of course, I can't understand your father. Why would he do that? But I'll tell you right now, he doesn't mean you any harm. I hope I'm the only one who thinks it's the other way around. Lucy approached her son, who held a glass of whiskey in his hands and looked around. I told you not to hurt Casey. And what have you done? Mom, you saw her. I don't think you'd be holding back if you were told to marry a freak. I can't look at her either. You know, it's embarrassing to go out with her. No, I can't marry her. It's not for me. I'd rather work. And let your father do what he wants. It's much worse than that, son. He told me he'd disinherit you and kick you out of the house. Well, that's just thrash. I can't believe it. What is wrong with all of you? It's a disaster and Tony's the only one who can save us. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Son, please don't hurt Casey. She's a very nice girl. They're rich, you know, very rich, and you've got to get out of your head and like her. Mom, she already likes me, but she doesn't like me. What are you gonna do about it? Be patient, son, because we have no other choice. I realize you're a handsome boy, and we're forcing you to marry a toad. Just bear with me for a while. I'm begging you. Okay, Mom, just for you. Barry and Tony went to the table and each took a glass of champagne. The landlord could see that his friend was tense and thinking about something. He didn't like it and thought he might change his mind. Are we going to marry our children, or have you changed your mind? No, I haven't changed my mind. I think it's a good fit for my daughter and your son. I hope he's a smart boy and doesn't hurt my daughter, because you know I can't forgive him for that. Sure, don't worry. Everything's gonna be fine. Look at them talking about something. They'll probably get along. They're young, and you know it's easier to get along at that age than when you're older. You're right, it gets harder as you get older. Joe walked over to Casey and took her by the elbow. We need to talk. I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I didn't mean to offend you. I just remembered how you used to beat me up when I was a kid, so I couldn't take it. But you didn't do too badly back then either. But that didn't stop me from not attacking you. I understand and I apologize again. Did you know that our parents want to marry us? Yeah, they told me the other day. Honestly, I'm not thrilled about it, but you can't argue with my dad. Who are you talking to? She's not thrilled. If it wasn't for me, you probably wouldn't have gotten married, Joe thought, but said aloud. It was an unusual proposition for me too. Besides, I wasn't going to get married anytime soon. But if that's the way our ancestors wanted, then so be it. So you agree? Yes, I agree. I think we're gonna make a great family. Casey looked like a tomato. She was blushing and didn't know what to do with herself. She thought Joe was telling the truth, that he realized she was a good girl, and that in time she'd pull herself together and clean up her act. Mama always told her she only blossomed when she got married. I think so too. She whispered, lowering her head, and didn't see Joe's twitch after those words. In the evening, when the celebration was in full swing, Tony started to head home. The original plan to stay at Barry's house for a sleepover had pleased him less and less. He could see that he was trying his best to please him, and that made him disgusted. He walked over to his wife and took her under his arm. Let's go home. I don't want to stay here. We'll invite them to a restaurant this week and talk about it. Now take Casey and let's go. Nanny went to find her daughter without a word. Tony looked after her and thought about how lucky he was to have a wife. She never asked him stupid questions like why? What's wrong? She always knew that if her husband said to do as he said, and then asked him why he made the decision he did. She found her daughter in the garden. They were walking with Joe and talking about something. She called her daughter, and she said something to Joe and hurried to her mother. Mother, is something wrong? No, darling, it's just that father wants to go home, so I'm coming to get you. Casey didn't elaborate either, realizing that if Daddy said so, then so be it. Okay, Mama, let's go. She turned to Joe and waved goodbye and followed her mother. Joe stared at her in surprise, not realizing what was happening to him. He hadn't expected it himself, but he enjoyed talking to Casey. She was a very interesting girl. She could talk about anything. She was very developed in all directions. If he didn't look at her looks, she was quite interesting. But when he looked at her, the magic would dissipate and he would see a fat cow in front of him again. If only she had a different appearance, then I would have fallen in love with her. At least it's a good thing she's not stupid, or I'd go crazy. Barry and Lucy looked anxiously at Tony's family, who had decided to go home. Something wrong, Casey? Did our son hurt you? No, Aunt Lucy. We had a nice chat with Joe. It's okay. Don't think anything of it. I'm just tired and I need to get home. Besides, I've got things to do. I got a call saying that my presence was required. Well, maybe you can go, Tony, and your girls can stay with us. No, Lucy, thank you, but I'd rather be with my husband. And Casey's been asking to go home too, because she has a hard time falling asleep in a new place. So don't worry, everything's fine. We'll call you next week and make an appointment. We'll go to the restaurant and we'll talk about it. Now we really should get going. As Tony's family left, Barry looked at his wife angrily and said, "Was it something you said to them or Joe? Why would you think everything was fine? I saw your son and Casey walking in the garden. I was with the guest and I didn't say anything, so don't go looking for faults amongst us. You're drunk again. That's why I asked. You've been drinking a lot and I don't like it. What else don't you like? Don't tell me what to do. You better tell that to your mistress, who's probably already cut the phone off trying to call you. And I better not touch me, or I will raise such a scandal that you yourself will be sick." With that, Lucy turned around. She walked away with an unsteady gait. Barry looked after her and thought that at last he has not. His wife knows the secret. That's fine. Besides, he was going to tell her everything soon, because he realized that he could not live with her under the same roof. Tony was sitting in his office, and he didn't like the idea of marrying his daughter to Barry's son. He didn't want his Casey to suffer, but he saw no other option. Barry was very cunning, and he wouldn't let anyone into his business. Even though Tony had helped him get back up again, he didn't know what was going on there, and he had a gut feeling that he was going to get screwed. He didn't like it, and he saw how his friend treated his wife. It was obvious that soon they would probably be divorced. Barry literally looked with hatred at his wife, who was not in love with her husband either. Apparently, she knew about his love affairs, and she didn't care. And most often when it happened, it meant that a breakup was coming. That didn't suit him either. And the third was Barry's mistress, who was probably pushing him into the next adventure, and he was like a bull on a leash, obeying her in everything. Nanny peered into the office, asking with her eyes if she could come in or should she come over a little later. He nodded, and she walked into the study, sitting down in the chair in front of him. He looked at her with pleasure and thought about the fact that he had the most beautiful wife on earth. "Honey, don't you have anything to say to me?" she murmured affectionately, looking at her husband. "I do. You know, I've been wondering if I'm making a mistake marrying my daughter to Barry's son. It's up to you, though you know my opinion. I'm against it. But then there's Casey, and she seems to like Joe." "Well, all right then, plans change again. I was about to change my mind, but now that it's happened, let's not upset my daughter and marry her off to the man she likes. Except I'm afraid he'll break her heart. Don't worry, our girl is strong. She just needs to wake up." "How's that? You know, she's just like you, and I can't wait for our daughter to feel her strength. I need her. You know how much I want her to work with me at the bank. She wants to work with me too. I know it's her dream. I guess you won't have long to wait. By the way, we need to talk about the wedding." As far as I understand Lucy, her husband told her that he doesn't want to wait and wants to do the wedding as soon as possible. "A wedding?" Tony laughed, looking merrily at his wife. "But I don't think so, because we'll be responsible for all the expenses. I don't think you mind." "Don't insult me with your words. When I've denied our daughter something, she must shine like a queen, and I'll do anything to make sure she does." "I think so too. Then call Monday and make an appointment. You can pick a restaurant of your choice. Plan a time around 7 o'clock. I'll be free by then, so make it Wednesday because I'm busy the next few days. You got it?" "I'll do my best. I got a question for you. Have you seen Barry's relationship with Lucy? I remember when they got married, when she had Joe, and I thought they were very fond of each other. I don't know what's going on with them now. I guess it's just love gone, that's all. And Lucy's been drinking a lot, and I guess Barry doesn't like it very much. A woman can't just drink, I suppose. Something's happened. Probably a mistress and Lucy found out about it. You're so perceptive, aren't you? The woman is always right. If you have time, talk to her, invite her to our house or to a restaurant. But I don't have to tell you what to do. Maybe she'll tell you something interesting and then you can tell me. Okay, I'll talk to her. The next day, Nanny called Lucy and invited her to her workplace. She told her that since the wedding was happening, it wasn't a phone call and they should talk face to face. Lucy agreed and said she would come to her place at 3 in the afternoon. Nanny did all her chores and waited for her guest. At exactly 3 o'clock, Lucy entered the store, and from surprise, she lost even the power of speech. When at last she was able to speak, she said, "I didn't realize you had such a huge store. It's gorgeous. You probably only have stars dressing here. Half the stuff in here I can't afford." "Yeah, it's expensive, but there's a much cheaper store across the street with the same brand. I thought it was the right thing to do. Not all people need such things as there are here. You have correctly noticed that this store is for stars and people who often go to some receptions. And that store is for ordinary people who want to dress not only fashionably, but also comfortably. To be honest, I recently found out that you have your own business. I guess we just stopped talking. The last time we saw each other was when your Joe was 12 years old, and then we somehow got lost. My husband got a job, and I didn't want to sit around, so things got a little crazy. But that's okay, since I'm free now, I'm gonna close up the office, and you and I are gonna go someplace nice. We'll sit and talk and discuss our kid's wedding. You know, time is short, and we have a lot to do. I'm gonna need your help, because I can't do it on my own." They hailed a cab and Nanny gave her the address of the nearest restaurant. She saw Lucy shiver and realized that she knew the place well, and knew it was expensive. "Why don't we just go to the cafe?" "Don't worry, it's my treat. Besides, the cafe won't serve good food, and I'm very hungry. We'll have lunch and talk. I don't suppose you mind, it's been so long since we've seen each other. I think we have a lot to talk about." They sat in the restaurant for an hour. Nanny listened to Lucy tell her about her life. "I could see that he was getting cold to me, and I couldn't understand why. But then I realized that he had a mistress. I even followed him and saw her. She's so ugly, I don't know what he sees in her. And his eyes light up when he talks to her on the phone. And I'm so hurt. I mean, we started out together. I was there for him when he had a hard time starting his business. And now what? There is a woman a little younger than me, already at the ready for everything so unfair. And the main thing is that I'm everything for him. I never cheated on him. Always waited at home and listened to his complaints. When things didn't work out for him, and this is the result. He doesn't love me, he loves another woman." "Lucy, but maybe you're wrong. It happens. He'll go out and dunk her, and then you'll be back to normal. I can see he loves her and he'll never leave her. We've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for a year now. He doesn't want me, I know that for a fact. So I started drinking. Because if I don't drink, I start feeling sorry for myself, cursing my husband and my mistress, and that only makes me feel worse." Nanny listened to Lucy and realized that she did not feel sorry for her at all. She saw that this woman has achieved it herself. First, a man should see a beautiful woman next to him. Looking at Lucy, it became clear that she has not looked after herself for a long time. And secondly, they like it when a woman can provide for herself. Then they realized that she will not be lost and try to do everything to be near her. But Lucy thought that her support would be enough, but time passes. Men get on their feet and realize that their wives are not what they used to be and try to find someone on the side. When Lucy had had her say, Nanny decided to turn the conversation around and talk about the wedding. They talked for a while and Nanny realized that she would have to do everything herself, because Lucy didn't know anything at all. Not the restaurants, not the people who could organize these weddings. And when the conversation came to the invitations, and they decided to look at samples on the internet, Nanny realized that Lucy has absolutely no taste. "Okay, I'll take care of it myself. I'll just call you and tell you, okay?" Sure. It's just that I'm really behind on everything. I don't know anything, I don't understand anything." "It's okay. I'll organize everything myself. Plus, I'll have help from people who organize events." "All right, well, I've got to go to the store then home." Casey told the girls about meeting Joe yesterday. "He's so handsome, you have no idea. He used to be so skinny and ugly. But now he's different. He must be working out because he's got muscles and abs. Anyway, he's a very handsome guy." "Are you in love with him?" "Yes, I like him. I'd love to marry him." "What about school?" "Well, I'll keep studying. One thing doesn't prevent another." So you'll be a married woman soon, and when is the wedding? I don't know yet, as my parents decide. But you people are strange after all. You're the ones who should decide when you get married, not the other way around. Nancy, you know my father. It's no use arguing with him. He'll do what he says, and all Mom and I have to do is obey. On the other hand, if my father were a banker, I'd listen to him and not argue. But alas, we don't have fathers like that. Well, we're going home, the driver's waiting for you, stomping by the car. The wedding was set for the end of the month. Casey was surprised because she knew that when couples applied, they had to wait 3-4 months, but this was so fast, she was a little scared. Mom, I wasn't expecting this. It's a week away. I know I'm a little confused myself, to be honest, but you know your father. If that's what he wants, that's the way it should be. I wanted to talk to you, by the way. Which of your friends would you like to invite? Nancy and Leslie? I don't have anyone else. You know, they don't really talk to me, they laugh at me. And the other day a girl told me that with my father's money, she would have cleaned herself up a long time ago instead of walking around as a scarecrow like me. Don't mind her. That's what they say when they're not smart enough. You're a smart girl, you realize that it's not about looks, it's about the inside. All right, you go do your work. I'll do the guest list. The guest list was very long. That was just on their part. After it was ready, she called Lucy and asked her to make her own list so she could group it all together and go from there. I just need it ready tomorrow, and if you can bring it to work, because I can't do anything right now. And I'm getting help. Barry could see that everything was going according to plan. He rubbed his hands together and thought that as soon as he had the money in his hands, he would immediately take the tickets and go with Lily to the sea far away from here and start a new life. He no longer cared about his wife or his son. They would get by on their own. After all, he spent his life on them and now has the right to live for himself. He calculated absolutely everything, son. He was not sorry. He is a young, smart guy. Besides, he can divorce as soon as everything is done. First of all, Barry wanted to take revenge on Tony for not helping him at once when he asked him for money to invest in his business. He remembered that moment well and longed for revenge. Tony had told him at the time that he didn't believe in all this and wouldn't invest the money. But Barry was able to spin and prove that he too can something in this life. True, he was foolish and fell for the scammers, but it played into his hands. He decided that his son would help him in this, and he would get revenge on Tony through his daughter, who would be disgraced. Joe was at the club, sickened by the fact that he was getting married tomorrow and his bride was very far from ideal. He'd imagined things differently, and he still couldn't believe it was happening to him. He was offended that his father wanted to raise his business at his expense, even though he had offered to help him many times. Dad, you're not alone now. I'll help you with everything. Why do we need this wedding? It's one of Tony's conditions. Besides, we were planning on you two getting married and being related before. I just don't really want to be related to him now because he didn't help me once, and I still remember that. But now he's giving us a huge amount of money. You see, this is our chance. We'll be rich again, and everything will be fine. And you'll get divorced and find yourself a decent girl. He remembered this conversation that had recently taken place in his father's study. It was unpleasant for him to realize that he was just being used at the moment. But nothing, I'll get rid of her. As soon as my father has the money, I'll file for divorce, he thought. Why are you like this? Are you nervous? Just sleep with her and then tell her she's not a girl anymore and everything will be fine. Say you thought you were marrying an honest girl, but she turned out to be the opposite. Come on, guys, I can't do it. I can't do it. Have you seen her? She's a monkey and she's fat. No, I'm probably not gonna make it. You have a drink and then you'll think she's cute. You do your business and then you'll make a scene and get rid of her that way. Joe felt a little uncomfortable, realizing he couldn't do that. But then, remembering the look on Casey's face, he decided that that was exactly what he would do and let her father deal with her later. Barry went to the bank to sign the papers, since the wedding was a done deal, because Tony said he'd given the amount he asked for, and Barry was asking for a lot. It was surprising, of course, but it was no problem for Tony to give that kind of money to an old friend. He already knew everything Barry was going to do and mentally smiled, realizing how it was all going to end. Before handing over the check, Tony held up the papers for his signature and said that he too was becoming a part owner of Barry's firm. You understand, I need a guarantee because I can't just give you that kind of money. "I understand," said Barry, signing the papers. "When can I cash this check?" "After the wedding. Please don't think twice. I realize you won't change your mind, but as far as I know, you're not planning on doing anything with it right now. Because it takes time. You can't keep that much money at home because, you can't trust anyone right now. Besides, tomorrow's wedding is such a celebration, so let's have a rest, be happy for the kids. You can come to the bank on Monday and cash it in." After Barry left Tony's, he went to his mistress to tell her to book tickets to wherever she wanted to go. "I don't get it. You haven't cashed it in yet?" "There's no rush right now. Besides, I didn't want Tony to get suspicious. So, my love, it's Monday. You're making it so easy for me to leave. What about your firm, your business?" "I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. Let it all go to hell. I'm sick of it. Besides, I don't want to live in this city anymore. I want to go to the sea, where it's warm. That's where I'll start my new life with you." Lily bit her lip and said nothing. She had very different plans from Barry. She too wanted to go to the sea, where it was warm, to start a new life. Only not with him, but with the man she loved, the man she was going to marry. "All right, Monday. Then I'll book the tickets on Sunday, and you and I will go far away and forever." Casey looked at herself in the mirror and bit her lip to keep from crying. The dress was amazing, the one her mom had picked out for her. She looked like a round white barrel, and it made her want to sob. She realized that Joe would stand there in the costume, beautiful as God, and when he saw her he would be horrified and run away from her. It was frightening, because she thought the nightmare of any bride was if the groom left her at the altar. Of course, such cases were rare, but looking at herself in the mirror, she realized it could happen to her, and it would be a miracle if Joe didn't run away at the sight of her. As Nanny watched her daughter suffer, she remembered herself, standing like that in front of the mirror, sobbing and saying she wouldn't leave the room so her fiancé wouldn't be frightened. Her mother persuaded her and told her that he loved her just the way she was and saw her not as a fat girl, but as a beautiful person. She would have been hysterical if Tony hadn't come to her then and told her she was more beautiful than any bride in the world. That's when something happened to her. It was like she was reborn. They went on a honeymoon, and she lost a lot of weight in a week. All the acne was gone from her face, and she was just beautiful. When they came back, nobody recognized her, and then they thought she had an operation to pump out the excess fat and injected some vitamins into her face. Only Tony saw his fat wife turn into a beautiful woman. "Honey, it's okay, you're beautiful, so don't cry. Pull yourself together and let's go. Because everyone is already waiting and the guests and the groom." Casey pulled herself together, telling herself there was no turning back, and there's no turning back. When Casey got out of the car, Joe struggled to keep from running away. He couldn't look at his fiancée, realizing how ugly she was. He was sick of looking at her, and so he just clenched his fists and lowered his eyes, mentally telling himself that all this wouldn't last long and that as soon as his father got his affairs straightened out, he would divorce her immediately afterward. He did raise his head and looked at his future wife. A blush flooded her brushes, and he looked at her carefully and saw that her face was quite attractive, and she looked a lot like her mother. True, not by much, but there was a resemblance. Casey didn't remember what the woman at the registry office had said to them, only when they had to say yes. She barely heard herself whisper her consent. And then when everyone shouted bitterly, she turned to Joe. He leaned over and kissed her on the lips. The kiss was cold and quick, but it was enough for her. She blushed even more and lowered her eyes. Tony looked at his daughter and remembered how 19 years ago. He stood at the altar just like that, only his heart was full of love. He realized that his daughter would probably resent him a lot, but it was worth it. She would finally be a real girl, because he could see that she looked a lot like her mother. He still couldn't understand what had happened then and why it had happened that indeed, his ugly wife had turned out to be such a beauty. Nanny laughed later and said that everyone in their family was like that. She really didn't believe her mother, who persuaded her then and said that everything would be fine. The guests were having fun, the table was bursting with delicacies, and Casey watched Joe silently drinking whiskey, one glass after another. She felt bad because she could see that she disgusted him. Her heart was already in love though, and she longed to be in the bedroom with her husband sooner rather than later. She saw the apartment her father had given them for their wedding. It was a posh apartment with a huge hall, with a kitchen and 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. An upscale building where apartments weren't everyone's cup of tea. She felt tired and wanted to be home sooner and take off that white dress, which annoyed her a lot. Finally, the cake was brought out, and the young people had to go to their apartment. Casey sighed and asked the chauffeur to help her load her husband into the car. After saying goodbye to her parents, she drove home, glancing at Joe, who was sleeping with his mouth slightly open. When they arrived, she, along with the chauffeur who helped get him into the apartment, put him to bed. She realized that they probably weren't going to make it tonight. She sighed and went to the bathroom. She wanted to rest, because she was very tired. When she got out of the shower, she saw Joe sitting on the bed, looking around, trying to figure out where he was. "This is our apartment. Our father gave it to us," she said quietly and sat up to brush her long hair. Joe stared at her for a moment and then walked over to pick her up and started kissing her. He himself could not understand what had come over him, but the desire to possess this girl was very great. Casey woke up in the morning and looked around. Joe wasn't around, but she could hear him looking for something in the kitchen. She threw on her robe and went to see what he was doing there. He looked at her glumly and then said, "Get dressed, let's go to your father. I took a chaste girl as my wife, and you are not the first freshness. And I don't want one." Casey choked with indignation. She could see he didn't remember anything. How they'd showered together, how they bathed after the first time. He'd forgotten everything, and now he thought he wasn't her first. She felt bad because she realized she couldn't prove anything. Silently, she turned around and, swallowing a tear, began to get dressed. She didn't care anymore. Let them give her back to her father, and she would tell her mom everything and cry. She knew her mom would believe her and comfort her. Tony was sitting in a chair looking at papers when the door opened and her daughter and her husband walked into the apartment. Joe, without even saying hello, stood in front of his father-in-law and said, "Take your daughter back. I didn't realize you had her already used." Tony looked at Casey, who was standing there red and ready to fall through the ground, and then back at Joe, who looked like he was hungover and sore. Besides, he'd seen that he'd had a lot to drink at the wedding and probably didn't half remember what had happened last night. "You've thought it over, Joe. You'll bite your elbows. You want her back, but I won't let you. You're doing yourself to misery. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. You can't be serious. If it wasn't for my father, I wouldn't even look at your daughter. I don't want her, so take her back." "I will, but be warned. Afterward, don't even come near me and don't even come near her either." Joe looked at Casey's father in surprise, not knowing what he was talking about. It was as if they didn't understand each other. Although he could see that his father-in-law was very serious, he didn't say anything more, but just turned and walked out. Casey rushed to her father and burst into tears. "Daddy, I'm sorry, but it's not true. He was drunk, and I, stupid me, didn't realize anything and agreed to it. It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's gonna be okay, trust me." Casey didn't leave her room for a week. Nanny saw how bad her daughter was, and she and her husband decided to send her abroad. "Let her study there. I've already done the transfer, so she'll be much better there. 4 years will heal her wounds quickly, and she'll come back a new person. I didn't think it would work out that way. I believed he'd see the inner beauty in her like I saw in you. He's not a bad guy. I even thought I'd bring him in and feel sorry for Barry and let him go. But now they're all asking for it. They can't handle things properly, so they can't get anything from me." As soon as Joe left Casey's apartment, he called his friends and told them he had wonderful news to tell them. They called him to the cottage, and within an hour, he was sitting with his friends saying that he was now free. "I did as you advised me, and then in the morning I returned it to my father." "Yeah, man, we didn't expect that from you. That was the world's fastest divorce. You should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. By the way, the girls will be here soon. They were happy when they heard you were divorced too. Cindy will be too, so don't get lost. Besides, she likes you. You know how worried she was when she found out you were getting married. We talked to her all night and told her it wasn't a big deal for you." When the girls arrived, the fun continued. Only Joe couldn't find his place. He remembered what Casey's father had said to him. Those words kept him awake. He drank to drown out some of the longing that filled his heart. He kept having these fragmentary visions in his head, and he realized that he was having a good time. He remembered the smell of Casey's body, and he thought there was nothing sweeter than that. He thought he had too much to drink to have such thoughts, so he decided to go out into the fresh air to get some fresh air. Cindy came out and pressed up against him to kiss him, but something made him feel uncomfortable. He pulled away from her and said, "I'm sorry, Cindy. I must have had too much to drink, and I feel sick. You go inside and I'll come back later." Barry couldn't wait for Monday. He closed himself in his office, went through the files. What he didn't need, he tore up and threw away. Everything was ready. He wouldn't say anything to his wife because he didn't want to hear the tantrums, see the tears and listen to her pleas. He didn't love her and would leave her without regret. He knew she felt he was leaving her, and strangely enough, she never knocked on his door all day. In the evening, Lily called and purred affectionately that she was all set. She had her things packed and was waiting for her kitty. When he finally takes her far away, to beautiful lands. "You, the main thing, do not take a lot of things with you. Everything you need, we'll buy on the spot. Do you understand me? I told you I brought the essentials. And then why draw attention to yourself? Because a woman without a suitcase will seem suspicious." Barry smiled. He loved Lily for her spontaneity and her cheerfulness. He felt good with her. He could forget himself with her. Because he began to notice that he didn't have such an opportunity at home, and most likely that was what drove him to her. At first, it was just one fling for him. And after their first meeting, he thought he'd never see her again. But then he called her and they started seeing each other. First once a week, then twice a week. Then they started seeing each other every day. Now he will fulfill the dream of his beloved, who always dreamed of living where the sea and warmth. To live not in an apartment, but in a house, to grow flowers and fry fish. And in the evenings to look at the stars and dream. He wasn't serious about her dreams. But in time she was able to convince him that it was wonderful and that they would be happy there. And now there wasn't much left for happiness. He decided that early in the morning he would go straight to the bank, the one near the airport. Lily would be there waiting for him when he arrived. They'd get on a plane and go somewhere where no one would find them. After what happened, Tony called all the banks and told them not to give any money on the check they should be given. They'll know right away who they're talking about, because the check would have his signature on it. He decided to surprise Barry, although he didn't know about the biggest surprise of all. But that would come later. For now, he was waiting for the morning when Barry would finally go to get the money. Casey couldn't find a place of her own. She cried almost every day and wouldn't leave her room. She didn't look in the mirror, she didn't clean herself up, she hardly ate, and she didn't want to see anyone. Only her mother would let her in, who would stroke her head and say affectionate words to her. "Father said you should study abroad, and I agree with him. It will be good for you. A new country, new emotions. You'll see everything will pass and you'll come back a different person." "No, Mom, I'll always be ugly and fat. The good news is that most people in America are like that, and they're perfectly normal about it." "Honey, don't you ever look at yourself in the mirror?" "Why should I, Mom? What will I see there? My face, which I hate." Nanny took her daughter's hand and led her to the mirror. Casey looked at herself and couldn't believe her eyes. She had lost a lot of weight these days. Her face had transformed, and she didn't even recognize herself. "I was fixed by love, and you were fixed by suffering. It's bad, of course, but I think you'll get over it and start all over again. Then you'll meet a guy who'll love you, and everything will be fine." "Mom, I can't believe it. I look just like you. We even have the same eye color. Only mine are a little darker, and my skin is light like yours and even. Mom, look, I've gotten skinny." "It's understandable, because you haven't eaten anything. I even started to worry and thought that if you keep acting like this, I'll start feeding you like a little girl from a spoon and coax you to eat from Mommy and Daddy." 2 days later, her father bought Casey a ticket and she flew to America to continue her studies. Barry presented a check to be cashed, but it was refused. He went to another bank and was told the same thing. The third bank said no. And when he said he was going to complain, they told him to go to the person who wrote him the check. He realized this and went to Tony's to see what was going on. "You do realize that because of your games I'm having an important deal disrupted." He started from the doorstep when he entered Tony's office. "You and I had a deal. We didn't agree on anything, especially not this." Tony turned the computer monitor over to him and he saw Lily pacing nervously in the waiting room trying to make a phone call. He realized his cell phone was about to ring and discreetly decided to turn it off. "Oh, don't even try. You can text her back that your trip is canceled. By the way, to be honest, I saved your life because your sweetheart was going to dump you." "What are you talking about? We love each other and we want to live together." "If you don't believe me, then take the phone, answer her call, and then you'll see what happens." Barry didn't understand what Tony was trying to say, but he decided to pick up the phone and send Lily home after all, telling her he'd explain everything later. He heard her start to yell and say something to him, but he had already dropped the call. Then he looked at the monitor again and saw her walk over to a young guy who was standing not far from her and said something to him, then angrily pointed at the phone, apparently telling him it was canceled. She wasn't going with you, she was going with her boyfriend of several years. So they just wanted to make some money. I don't know how they would have gotten the money from you. She probably would have put sleeping pills in your tea or something to make you pass out for a while. And when you came to, you'd never see the money again. Barry sat down on the table and covered his face with his hands. He sat like that for a long time until he finally came to his senses. Such deceit he had not expected from his favorite girl. Thanks, Tony. If this had happened, I'd be a beggar. Well, don't get too excited, because you're already a beggar. Remember those papers you signed in exchange for the check? You willingly gave me the firm, and now it's mine. When you saw the money, you forgot all about it because your greed played tricks on you. So now you're a nobody, and frankly, I'm glad you are. But how can you? My son is married to your daughter. You can't do that. Not anymore. After our wedding night, he brought Casey back the next day and told her she wasn't a virgin and that I tricked him. To be honest, I wanted to smash your puppy against the wall, but I realized that it would be too easy for him. He didn't realize that he had a beautiful wife and that he would be a happy man with her, but it was his choice and he made it. And so have you, so you can go. Barry could see it was useless to talk. If his son hadn't acted this way, this probably wouldn't have happened. But what had happened was what had happened, and there was no turning back. He realized that Tony had known everything from the beginning, and he thought he outsmarted everyone and that no one had a clue about anything. Casey was doing very well abroad. Her father had bought her a house and she didn't need anything. After school, she would go home and study. And in the evening, friends she had met would come over and they would have a great time. She began to be courted. Guys told her how beautiful she was, but she immediately made it clear that her heart was full and that there was no room for anyone. Just one single friend who was always by her side and whom she let always be there for her. Michael. He treated her beautifully, understood her, and helped her to get used to the new place for the first time. She could see that he loved her, yet he never told her. Only later he would tell her that he was waiting for her heart to be free of unrequited love, and then he would take over. Time passed and Casey still couldn't get over Joe and their first wedding night. She had felt good with him, and she could see that he felt good with her. But what happened afterward, she could never understand. Then in time, she decided to face the truth and told herself that he just didn't love her. He just took advantage of her and then threw her away like a useless thing. She resented her father too, of course, but he did everything he could for her to make it up to her, and she eventually forgave him. The school year was coming to an end. Casey was so used to living here that she didn't want to go back. She realized that no one was waiting for her there and that it was better for her to stay here. Her father called her every day and told her to come to her senses, because he really wanted his daughter to work for him, to help him in his business, because he was having a hard time on his own. She understood him, but at the same time, she didn't want to go. In addition, Michael, seeing that she finally calmed down, began to court her openly, and she realized that it pleased her and that they could probably work something out. They drove his old car around the city at night every day. Then they'd drive out of town, sit on the hood of his car, and look up at the huge moon, which was so big you could touch it. She felt good with Michael. Plus, he could sense her perfectly. Knew what she wanted to talk and what you didn't. Today, they were determined to talk, and Michael started first. They'll never forget the day they first saw you. You were so sad and lost, yet so beautiful that I fell in love with you immediately. I remember that our meanest teacher, Mrs. Smith, who we were always afraid of, started addressing you as her daughter. And that won us all over, because you'd fallen in with the bullies. We never listened to anyone, and our teachers complained all the time. It was a miracle I didn't get expelled, although my candidacy was hanging by a thread, and then you came, and I did not want to behave so ugly. I wanted you to pay attention to me too, and you were just so sad all the time. Only in the second year you started smiling, talking to girls, and in the third year you even took part in our harmless pranks. That's when I realized that I love you very much, and that I didn't need anyone else but you. Casey smiled. She remembered that. At times, she had been very sad indeed. For the first year, she'd spent the whole time wishing she could go home, but then things had calmed down. She even started to like everything. I'd also remember looking at you and thinking, what are you doing? Why are you pushing your teachers around? Did you really enjoy it when they told you off and sent you to the principal's office? At such moments, it seemed to me that I had not gone anywhere, but I was in my institute and I was watching our guys making up something again. So you're just like us. Of course, not everything, but close to it. And then I started to like everything. The climate, the city, the people. Then friends appeared. They started coming to visit me, and gradually the loneliness left me and it became very good. I'm glad you're settling in. You don't look like you're from another country. You even dress like a local. Did the girls help you with your clothes? They did. You know how good friends I've become with Madi. She's my best friend now. By the way, did you know she likes Tom? She's crazy about him. Did you know he's not crazy about your friend? He's crazy about you. No, I didn't. Besides, you know as well as I do, guys like him are not my type. You tell him to pay attention to my friend. I think they'd be really good together. Spring came and Casey successfully graduated from college and received her diploma. Michael congratulated her happily and told her she was in for a surprise. Only she has to wait until tonight. Please be home alone tonight. Tell your friends you're busy. You can celebrate tomorrow, but tonight, please make time for me. Okay, Michael? You don't have to tell me because you know how much I love talking to you. That evening, Michael came over and asked her out for another ride. She thought that there probably wouldn't be a surprise, but she wasn't upset because she was already having a good time with him. They arrived at their favorite spot. Then Michael pulled out a box, opened it and said to Cassie, "Marry me?" It came as a surprise to her. She was silent and didn't know what to say. I know this came out too quickly without preparation, but I ask you not to say anything to me and to think at least until tomorrow. Michael, why is there so little time? Do you think it's enough? I've waited too long. I can't take much more. You have until tomorrow. Michael drove Casey home and kissed her cheap goodbye. Tomorrow night I'll come over to your place. I hope you'll give me an answer. Casey went home and looked at herself in the mirror. She realized that she should probably take Michael up on his offer. She felt good with him, at ease. But then she remembered Joe again. Her heart snapped, and she started packing. In the morning, she bought the tickets, flew home to her parents' house. She gave the ring to a friend and asked her to give it to Michael. She didn't write anything because it was already clear that this was her answer. 4 years passed. Joe worked in a car dealership, selling cars and taxiing in the evenings because money was always in short supply. Mom was very sick and constantly needed medication. After she found out what his father was going to do, she immediately filed for divorce and then went into the hospital, heart attack. She aged a lot. She didn't want to see anyone and only let her son near her. After the divorce, they sold the country house and bought an apartment in the city. Joe didn't know where his father was, and to be honest, he had no desire to communicate with him. He hated him because, as he believed, he had betrayed him, and his mother was going to leave with the money and not saying anything to anyone. You can't do that after all. They are family and they are not strangers to each other. Of course, he tried to establish relations with his wife at first, because he saw that with his son he would not succeed. Lucy didn't want to see him, and then she told him not to come to her anymore, because she hated him. Joe worked all the time because he realized that his mother needed good treatment. The medicine didn't help, and the doctor said she needed a change of scenery, to go to the sea and rest there. But he couldn't even afford it, even though he tried to save up at least a little sometimes in the evenings, when he was waiting for a passenger to take him to a restaurant or somewhere else. He remembered Casey, who still did not get out of his head. He had learned through acquaintances that she had gone to America and that she was likely to stay there. Sometimes he wished he could see her, to apologize for what he had done wrong. He remembered what had happened at their place that night, and now it tormented him that he had slandered her and left her. That's not what a man should do. But he had not realized then what he had done, and now he bitterly regretted it. More and more often he began to remember the words of Uncle Tony, who had told him then that he would bite his elbows. But he understood nothing, and it was only now that the meaning of those words began to dawn on him that no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, Casey would not get out of his mind. She had hooked him with her kindness and inner beauty. He didn't care about her looks now. She seemed to him the most beautiful girl in the world. Only now she was far away, and there was nothing he could do about it. Sometimes he thought about what if he met her and asked her to forgive him. Would she be able to forgive him, or would she scornfully tell him to leave her alone? Though most likely she had already met the one and most likely married him. These thoughts made him feel sick to his stomach. He wanted to go out and tear his hair out of his head, but he pulled himself together, remembered that he had a sick mother in his arms, and went to work again, to smile and think about the fact that he would probably never be happy again. For a week now, Casey had been working with her father. He would assign her cases, and she would go to the banks and check them out, then call her father back and tell him what problems there were. She liked the job a lot. She felt very good and realized she had done the right thing. Recently, however, she got a call from Michael, who begged her to go back to him, but she said she didn't want to cheat on him because she realized that she treated him as a friend, not as a loved one. "But I will love for the two of us. You'll be happy." But Casey disagreed with him, and at the end of the conversation she told him, "I'd also want to love myself, only then I will be happy." She knew that Michael understood her because he felt her very well and realized that no matter how much he loved her, she would never be happy with him. After their conversation, she felt sad because she realized that she would probably never love anyone like that, because she only had one person in her heart, and that was Joe. She realized, of course, that he was probably already married, that maybe he had children too, but she didn't ask her parents anything, and they didn't say anything. One day at dinner, the father looked at his daughter and then said that it was time for her to buy a car. "You see, daughter, sometimes I need a driver. There are times when you need to go urgently and you don't have a driver. He's with you, and you know I don't like to take cabs. I put money on your card, and on your phone the address of the salon. You go there, they say that they will give you a good advice and help you choose what you need." After these words, my father looked at his wife and winked. Nanny smiled and then turned to her daughter and said, "Indeed, daughter, it is very convenient. Besides, you're not a bad driver. I think you can handle it." "Mom, you make it sound like I'm saying no. I'll go tomorrow. Don't wait up for me then, Dad. I won't be here till this afternoon, but I promise I'll make up the time I miss." "It's okay. I'm thinking of giving you tomorrow off. It seems to me that after buying a car, you need to take a test drive, so to speak, to get used to the car. You drive around town, get used to the traffic, because you realize that it's one thing to drive with a driver, but to sit behind the wheel yourself is another." Casey knew her father was right, so she didn't argue with him. "Mom, maybe you should come with me. It's more fun together." "I can't tomorrow. I have a lot of things to do. Besides, the customers are coming and I need to talk to them. So you go on your own, girl. You're an adult. You can handle it. If anything, you call me or your dad and we'll advise you if you have any doubts about anything." Joe arrived at the salon as usual and waited for a customer. As luck would have it, his partner had fallen ill, and it was just the two of them and the principal today. It wasn't long before the headmaster came down to see him and stood at the door like a stooped man. "Something wrong, Liam?" "I don't know yet. I've been told we've got an important visitor on his way. I hope it's true. We need a sale now, or we won't make much money this month. By the way, there's a young girl coming, so use all your charm and go for it. Try to get her the most expensive car. Believe me, this girl has no limit." An hour passed, but nothing happened. Joe began to walk along the rows where the cars were standing and looked if everything was in order. He was just standing with his back to the door and didn't see a beautiful young girl enter the salon. Only then did he realize that someone had entered when the director said, "We are glad to see you. If I'm not mistaken, you're Casey." Joe flinched when he heard that name. He also stood back, afraid to turn around. Then when Liam called out to him, he turned around on woozy legs and met the eyes of the Stan he'd been dreaming of all these years. He gasped because he hadn't seen such beauty in his life. Casey had a beautifully gorgeous figure and a face so beautiful that it was impossible to take his eyes off of it. He could see that she recognized him too, because she turned pale and swayed. He was even frightened because he thought she might faint, and apparently so did the director because he took her under his arm and led her to the sofa. "Are you all right? Should I call an ambulance?" Casey shook her head and looked at Joe again. Then she turned to the principal, thanked him, and told him that she just had low blood pressure and it happens to her. "If you could please make me some coffee and I'll feel better right away." "Okay, I'll get it right away. And you, Joe, take a look, please. And if anything happens, call an ambulance right away." When he left, they looked at each other in silence, but then Casey turned away. Joe felt sick and wanted to stare into those eyes, and he wanted to grab her in his arms and never let her go again. Casey was the first to pull herself together. She got up off the couch and said, "I need a car. Can you advise me on anything?" Joe stood still because he couldn't take his eyes off her. "Shall I repeat my question? I have little time, and if you are not able to work, then I will go to another salon." The words made Joe feel uncomfortable. She was cold, and he knew he deserved to be treated that way. He didn't let on and started to tell her about cars, and she listened to him and looked around. Soon the car was chosen. They went to do the paperwork. He wanted to talk to her, but she did everything to avoid being alone with him. Then she got in and drove off altogether. Casey drove for a block and then stopped. Because she couldn't go any farther, her hands were shaking and her heart was jumping out of her chest. She saw the way he looked at her. At first her heart screamed with joy, and then he put the mask of coldness back on, like when she walked toward him in the white dress. Truly, the disgust was gone. Naturally, for she looked very good now. It's probably just me, stupid, making up my own damn mind, and he doesn't give a damn about me. Just like he didn't before, he doesn't care about me now. So Casey, get a grip, get this Joe thing out of your head and move on with your life. If it doesn't work out, I'll drop everything and come back to America. I'll marry Michael and forget the whole thing. I can love him because he's the most beautiful guy on earth. And this asshole I need to forget and never think of again. She was relieved and went on her way. She was glad her father gave her the day off. She drove around town. Then she reached a cafe and decided to have coffee and something to eat. She was determined not to think of Joe again, to close that page forever. After all, he had basically hurt her, and not only had she forgiven him, but she had thought about him all these years. He doesn't deserve that, and that's why she needs to make other acquaintances, meet men and get her own life together. At the word other man, Cassie shuddered and all her thoughts went back to Joe. After Casey left, Joe couldn't find a place for himself. He thought about her all the time and realized that he had fallen in love with her even more. Yes, in a way that even made his teeth clench from his helplessness. Liam saw that something was going on with Joe, so he decided to ask if he was sick. "No, I'm fine. I'm just thinking about that girl. She must have a very rich husband to buy such expensive cars for herself. As far as I know, she's not married. They said she was about 4 years ago, but then she got divorced." Tony quickly hushed it up, and nobody knows anything about it, although he's in the papers a lot. He's a rich man, and that's all there is to it. To be honest, I thought a spoiled brat was gonna come in and run the place. You know how it is. But she surprised me. So modest, polite, well-mannered. She's a pleasure to do business with. Joe didn't say a word. If he'd known who this girl was married to, he wouldn't have believed it. And if he did, he'd probably twiddle his thumb and call him an idiot. Because only a man with nothing in his head could lose a girl like that. Casey arrived home and looked surprised at her father, who was sitting in his room, apparently waiting for her. "So, how did you like your trip? Bought yourself a car?" "Yes, Daddy. Thank you. Now I'll go on my own, and you'll always have a driver with you. Are you tired or something wrong? Do you look a little pale to me?" "I'm fine, Dad. I'm just a little tired. You know it's hard to drive when you're not used to it. I'm going to go to my room, take a shower, and I'll feel better. And then I'll come down to your room." "Okay, daughter, take your time, rest easy. I have a little work to do, and then when Mom gets here, we'll all have dinner together." "That's fine, then I'll go." Tony looked at his daughter and smiled. Everything had happened just as he had hoped. He knew his daughter still loved Joe, and he too, apparently, couldn't get over Casey. Because it had been so long and he'd never had a serious relationship, but now it was time for them to be together. No more running away from each other. He wasn't mad at Joe anymore because he saw that he had fallen in love with his daughter in the beginning, even though he didn't realize it himself. But now there was enough suffering because these two were made for each other. Casey had been traveling all day on her father's business and was about to go home when he called her and told her he was waiting for her in his office. She thought something was probably wrong and rushed to her father's office. The bank was already quiet. The employees had all dispersed and only the security guards were in the room. She walked to her father's office, opened the door and saw Joe. She turned pale, then shifted her gaze to her father. He got up from his chair and said, "We've talked. Now you two talk and I have one phone call to make." Casey turned to Joe and asked, "What else do you need from me? You don't seem to have a problem with me. All I want is for you to marry me again." After he said that, he came over to her and hugged her. Casey realized she didn't need anything else because she was finally happy.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.